For jazz great Ramsey Lewis, the road to fame and fortune all began with a song called The In Crowd.
We were in this coffee shop, and this lady comes over, and because we'd been going in there across the street from the Apollo Theater. What are you guys doing? We're trying to think of a song. You guys should put the In Crowd. LD and Red knew the In Crowd. I didn't know it. There was a jukebox. In those days, there were jukeboxes in coffee shops.
Sure.
And she played it. And I said, oh yeah, that's easy. I said, you know, that'll work. So after the 3 nights of recording, we listened back, and everybody said, you know, you should put that out as your single. And we did, and can I use the cliche, the rest is history?
He's been an influential leader in the contemporary jazz movement for more than 50 years. A conversation with Mr. Ramsey Lewis coming up next on Music Makers.
Music Makers is made possible in part by NAM, the National Association of Music Merchants. We envision a world in which the joy and many benefits of making music are a precious element of daily living for everyone. Want to play?
With numerous gold records and Grammy Awards, Ramsey Lewis has been a virtual ambassador for all that's good about jazz and gospel, starting with big hits in the mid-'60s and tour dates for more than 50 years. I'm honored to have as our guest, jazz great Ramsey Lewis. Well, I'll tell you, at this point in your career, you must look back some days and pinch yourself thinking, boy, did this life ever really happen or not? You know, the length and longevity of your career has just been astounding.
Well, you know, it's amazing to me because at the beginning, I didn't plan this. You know, 4 years old, I started taking piano lessons, much because my older sister got to take it, and I wanted to copy her. She got to quit and do other things.
Right.
Ended up being the pastor of our church, now retired. But I continued under duress because I thought taking the lesson was all you did. You go once a week for 20 minutes, right? Then you get to tell all the kids in the neighborhood, guess what? I take piano lessons. But I didn't know you had to practice. So the practice part was a dilemma for me. Fortunately, my parents, my mom and dad, said, you are going to practice. And there were times Dad came home from work and she'd ask my mom, they call me Sonny.
Yeah.
Did Sonny practice today?
Yeah.
No, oh God, that was the worst. So it was a chore. I must have been fairly good because at 9 years old, my parents said, you're going to start playing for our church choir.
So your first playing really in public was in church?
First playing was in church. Started out playing just for the gospel choir. Then they said a few months later, you might as well play the whole service. We had an organist, Eleanor Carter. She's leading, you just follow her and you play the whole service along with her. So it was good for me because that taught me the importance of reaching out to an audience. I mean, you know, in African American church, if the music doesn't resonate,
right,
you're out of here.
That's an interesting and probably explanatory way. You really have, from day one, been really hip to playing in front of people, you know?
Exactly. But, you know, it wasn't until I started taking lessons with Dorothy Mendelsohn, and that was 12, 13 years old, that the piano became closer and more involved with my very being. Because at church, you know, they talked a lot about the Spirit, the Holy Spirit,
sure,
et cetera, and I couldn't relate totally with what that meant, your inner being. But when Dorothy Mendelsohn, at 12, 13, said, when you play, make the piano sing. Now, I hadn't heard that before. You know, my dad sang, the choir sang, the church sang, they sang. I played.
Right.
The piano sing. And she said, the way you do that is by playing like legato and a certain feel in your fingers. And then she said, listen with your inner ear. Ah, inner ear, church, inner being. I hadn't put all that together. So in many ways, studying with Dorothy Mendelsohn and getting more involved in classical music brought me more into the piano and how it allowed me to develop as a musician.
Tell me about where the transition from getting to that point to all of a sudden it's the Ramsey Lewis Trio and we got a record deal?
Well, one Sunday after church, one of the other church musicians who was in college at the time came over. Ramsey, come. I said, what's up? He says, we want you to be in our band. Well, I'd like to be in your band. You know, and he says, well, our piano player is going to be Sarah Vaughan's accompanist. Now, in hindsight, years later, I look back at that.
Yeah.
And a light should have come on and said, if he's good enough and the band is good enough to have a piano player that could go play with Sarah Vaughan, and you've only played gospel and classical to this point, are you ready to really do this? But the light didn't come on. I'm like, yeah, I'm 16 years old, you know.
This is like a big band or a dance band.
Yeah, it was a dance band. It was 7 pieces. It was
So it had some horns.
Three horns, a guitar. Okay. I mean, you know.
It's like a small jazz.
Yeah, because in those days, you danced to jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were still dancing to jazz. So I show up. In fact, I was going to Chicago Musical College, and I got out about 5 o'clock, and the thing was at 7:30, so I just went over there. I was there early. I was doing some homework. They started coming in. So they said, come on up on the bandstand. And we did a little sound check in those days, not as elaborate as they do these days.
Right.
And he says, okay, let's start out with something easy. Okay, this is based on the blues. Let's do Charlie Parker's Now's the Time. Ramsey, you got it. Right. He starts to kick it off. He says, blues in F. No. He says, okay, and he picked, I don't know, on the sunny side of the street, one of those things. Okay, no. This went on for about 3-4 minutes, and people are waiting for the show to start. I sat there. He said, they started playing anyway, and I sat through that for about a tune or two. He finally said, Ramsey, why don't you go sit over there, and we'll take you home later. It's funny, as I look back, I wasn't insulted, I wasn't embarrassed, I just figured, oh, well, I don't know those songs, and that's what they play. I know these songs, and they're not playing them. So I went and sat over on the side and did some more homework. I finished my homework. When they got through, he took me home. And on the way, I'm thinking he's going to say, great, but maybe in a couple of years you'll come and see us.
Right.
But he says, if you come over to my house tomorrow, I can show you a few things.
And this is the leader that asked you to begin with.
The leader. So I went over to his house, and he said, now this is the blues. Blues changes are like this. And that's a lot of Charlie Parker songs are based on the blues. And here's a book of standards. Now standards are written by Cole Porter or George Gershwin, and he gave me the whole spiel. And then he said, now to get an idea of how this jazz thing works and how different stylists can play the same song in a different way, I got to give you a little background. In those days, you could go down to a record shop and you could take a record shop and you could take an LP into a booth.
Yes.
So I got some Bud Powell and Earl Garner and Oscar Peterson, took them into a booth and listened to what they were doing with these songs.
So this was your first eye-opener to, non-classically written notation, non-fully notated things.
Well, on paper or asked to perform it, Dad had Art Tatum at home. Now, anybody who knows music or knows piano knows that Art Tatum sounds like Mr. Art and Mr. Tatum. It doesn't sound like one piano player.
Right.
So Dad had some Art Tatum, which to me was gobbledygook. It was just too much. Way over my head. And he had some Count Basie and Duke Ellington. So, I'd heard the music, but I'm so heavy into gospel, heavy into classical, European classical music, that I really hadn't gotten into the music. So Wallace Burton was his name, God bless him, had he not done that. So I did exactly what he said and learned some things, and he slowly taught me, and then I would we played almost every weekend, and he would play songs that he had taught me, and I got into the music. Well, what happened, the Korean War came along, and everybody in the band was older than I was.
Right.
So everybody was drafted except the rhythm section. Yeah, the trio was left. And we became a trio. Ultimately, even the drummer was drafted, but he came back, and we played around Chicago.
That was Red Holt, right?
Red Holt. Yeah. We played around Chicago, and there was a jazz...
So that was the beginning of the trio, was the remainder of that band?
Remainder of the Clefs.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and And at that time, we were all
And that
doing...
was the Ramsey Lewis Trio?
Well, yeah, but we didn't see it that way. At that time, we were just a jobbing group of musicians, each one of us still going to school and doing things. And this
working gigs.
Working gigs, you make a few bucks on the weekend, you know, and then that's it. See you next week, a rehearsal or whatever. It wasn't until a DJ, and we had about 3 or 4 jazz stations. 3 or 4 jazz stations, hello, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the very popular jazz DJs was Holmes Daddy-O Daly. and he used to come hear us play this trio in this lounge, very nice, classy lounge, fortunately. And eventually, he came over and he says, you know, you guys are pretty good. Well, thank you. Have you ever thought of making records? Maybe, we never even thought about it. Well, you should. Long story short, Holmes Daddy-O Daly knew the Chess family.
Okay.
The Chess producing company, Chess Records. Chess Records. And he says, you guys should hear him. He got us an audition. And at the time, the Chess family also owned a stationery store, but in the back of the stationery store, they had an old piano, an upright. And we showed up one Saturday afternoon, and the trio set up.
And what tunes are you playing? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Standards.
So you're just playing standards?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so you're playing standards.
Playing standards. So we played 3 or 4 songs. And at the time, Leonard Chess and Phil Chess were more into the blues because their success had been with Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and these blues. So they called in their shipping guy. His name was Sonny. Sonny, come in here. And Sonny, you know, is an African-American guy. He came in. He says, okay, you guys play again. We played a couple and say, Sonny, what do you think of this? I said, they're pretty good.
Funny. You know, you think about all the scientific studies and the focus groups and everything that goes into making a record now and doing that. And I think back then you're in the back of this guy's stationery store and he calls his shipping guy in and says, you're hired.
Right.
Basically, that's it.
Basically, that's what happened.
That's a great story. Right. So that had to have been a big turning point, huh?
It was. It wasn't huge. You know, nowadays when you get a record deal, it's a huge thing.
Right.
In those days, performance was most important. Being able to deliver the goods. So we got the record deal, and the trio started recording. And L.D. Young, Red Holt, and I, we were the trio. And we're playing along, we're playing jobs, and the years go by, and we ended up playing in a place called the Bohemian Caverns. Now, the Bohemian Caverns, to this day, is in Washington, D.C. It closed for a while, now it's reopened. But it was the jazz bastion of Washington, D.C. I mean, John Coltrane, Johnny Griffin, all the big hardcore jazz people played.
The Birdland of D.C., right?
There you go, the Birdland of D.C., good description. So you say, well, how did we end up there? Because we're, you know, well, I don't know.
We're guys from Chicago.
We ended up there, and we said, well, it's so important, we should do a live album. And we got all the songs together except one. We needed something this was now our 16th or 17th album. And we had gotten to the place where, after we got the serious...
Wait a minute, 16th or 17th?
Yeah.
So you guys were just...
Yeah, well, see, in those days, you put out an album every 6 months.
Ah, not every year.
Not every year. It wasn't until rock and roll came along in the 60s that things changed, and record companies says, no, once a year. So that's how I got so many albums.
Okay. Early on.
Early on. So we got to the Bohemian Caverns, and we wanted this one song that would be sort of a fun song. I mean, we got we got the stuff that's serious, so we wanted something that was a little more fun. Yeah. And we were in this coffee shop, and this lady comes over, and because we'd been going in there across the street from the Apollo Theater. What are you guys doing? We're trying to think of a song. You guys should put the in crowd. LD and Red knew the in crowd. I didn't know it. There was a jukebox. In those days, there were jukeboxes in coffee shops.
Sure.
And she played it. And I said, oh, yeah, that's easy. I said, you know, that'll work. So this was the afterthought on the album. So
that was the filler.
That was the filler.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So now we're recording live, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. And Thursday night, we played all our intricate stuff and all our showing off the stuff we knew.
Right.
And
you heavy jazzer, you. Right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And so we get to the end of the set, and we say, okay, we're going to close the set with this fun song. And I'll be darned, the people started clapping their hands and they started dancing in the aisles.
Brought down the house.
And the three of us looked at each other like, what's this? We were happy, of course.
Sure.
So after the 3 nights of recording, we listened back and everybody said, you know, you should put that out as your single. Can I use the cliche, the rest is history?
You may, and it's the truth, I think. Yeah, that really was your big breakthrough, huh? Breakout, I guess I should say.
Exactly.
All right, so the trio breaks up eventually.
Success spoiled us. And the three of us, until the record became, first was The In Crowd.
Right.
And then 6 months later, we had one called Hang On Sloopy. And that was huge.
She never heard of that one before. Hang On Sloopy, huh?
Yeah, you know, it was huge. I mean, our price was through the roof. And people, of course. It got to the point where we couldn't stand each other.
Mm.
And mainly, and not a lot of people know this, although we were a partnership and we split everything in 3 ways, the fact that it was my name. Why does it have to be your name all the time? When they turn on the radio, they only say your name. When the interviews come, they only ask for you. You're not such a much. And one thing led to another. And finally, we were playing a job, I'll never forget this, tears came to my eyes, in Seattle. And we were playing our hit record. And the people are grooving.
Yeah.
And the bass player walks off the stage.
Oh. Ouch.
We finished the set. A couple months later, we're playing our hit record again. The drummer walks off the stage. We go in the dressing room and it's like, you think you're this, you think, hey, my check is the same amount as your check. Yeah, but they think, so anyway, that broke
Egos
us
got
up.
in the way.
That broke us up. Out of everything dark comes something light. There was a very quiet young man that was on the staff of Chess Producing. In those days, record companies had staff musicians, staff producers, staff arrangers,
right.
You know, and there was this drummer that was on the staff of Chess Producing, very quiet and humble, and he whispered, hey, Ramsey, how are you? I'm good, Maurice, how are you? He made me start whispering.
And that would be?
Maurice White.
Maurice White, for the viewers that don't know that name, the founder of Earth, Wind & Fire, who went on to fame as a...
Huge fame.
Yeah, and rightly so. So Maurice White, the humble drummer from Chess Records.
Humble until he sets down to the drums. Then he becomes a firebrand. So when our trio broke up, I quickly got a bass player, Cleveland Eaton, but I was looking for a drummer, and I remembered Maurice White at the Chess Studios could play all different kinds of music. So I called him, I said, Maurice, you know, would you like to be with the group? He said, yeah, I'd love to be with the group. So he went out with me, and that was the trio.
Was he a good jazzer? I mean, he was a good jazz player?
Around Chicago, he played with a lot of jazz groups. But so that was what was great about Maurice, that eventually he used in Earth, Wind & Fire, was that he could play jazz, he could play blues, he could play rock, he could do so many things.
Yeah.
In fact, when he's playing at the drums, he's a firebrand, nice dynamics, but he had his cymbals. In those days, Maurice White played with his cymbals, so many people couldn't see him. They were kind of up.
Yeah,
and he would,
didn't have him flat either.
Yeah, it took all I could to tell Maurice, can you lower him a little bit? In fact, he started playing the kalimba. One day at rehearsal, he brought this thumb piano.
I was going to say, tell our viewers what a kalimba is.
It's a thumb piano. It's a piece of wood that has the metal strips, and there's clamped down, and you can use your thumb to make them go.
Yeah. Which years later, he played like crazy in Earth, Wind & Fire.
Exactly.
The sound those bands would do.
So he would sit at the drums, and during his drum solo, he would quiet it down, and then grab this kalimba, and he'd start playing, and people would go crazy. So not only now am I trying to get him to lower his cymbals, but when he's playing the kalimba, they couldn't see him.
Hold it up.
He wouldn't hold it up. Finally, I got him to not only lower his cymbals, I said, Maurice, when you're playing the kalimba, you should walk up to the microphone. You know,
so
we'll have a microphone, and hold a microphone and stand and play, and which he did. And it became one of the things in our show that we always had to do. So he got with the group, and he played with me for about 3 years. And one day, in his quiet way, he says, Ramsey, I'm going to form my own group. And, you know, up until then, I knew about the jazz people. I knew about all these things, blues and jazz mainly. And I'm thinking, so he's going to do a trio, quintet, jazz. So I said, so who are you going to have in your band? He says, well, we're going to do magic, and we're going to dance, and we're going to have horns, and we're going to do this, that, and the other.
You're going to do magic.
Yeah. So I told
As
him,
in magic acts on stage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So, you know, I said, Maurice, take a couple aspirin and go lay down. He formed the group, and he left, went to LA, and put the group together, and it became not popular overnight, but almost. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't long before he started having hit records. And while the first hit record was out there, I think That's the Way of the World or Reasons, one of those songs, I was in the studio doing an album. I'd already started it, but I remembered there was one concert I had to go to Washington, D.C. to play. So I said, I'll be back in a couple of days, don't change anything. We went to Washington, and while I'm in Washington, I get a call from Maurice. He's in New York City. Hey, Ramsey, what are you doing? Very quietly. I'm playing this concert. He says, I got a song that we're not going to use because we're mostly vocals now, but it's a great instrumental, and I think it could be bigger than your in crowd. Maurice, you know.
That's my calling card.
You're right.
That's my tune.
But him, having been in the group for 3-4 years, he knows when we start playing the in crowd, the people. And so for Maurice to say that, I said, really? I want it. He says, well, we're going from New York, we're going to go back to LA, but some of us, if you want, we can stop in Chicago and join you on the record.
Oh, because you're already in a session anyway.
I'm in a session anyway. So Philip Bailey, Maurice, Verdine White, Johnny Graham, I forgot who else, they stopped and they came down to the studio, and he said, okay, here we go. And then we started working.
What's the tune?
Yeah, well, he had this song, anyway, we worked on it for about 3 days, and he got it just the way he wanted it. He said, wait a minute, I'm going to put just a little vocals on this part and little vocals on this part. No words, but so this is it. And he says, this is your hit record. Now we're packing up. I said, what are you going to name it? He says, call it Hot Dog It. I said, really? He says, it's your hit. And he said, forgot. There's a melody. It's only a really nice kind of Brazilian melody, but with a nice R&B kind of Latin Brazilian rhythm. I think it's good for soloing. Like we play the melody, we start off with that, and then we'll go to the melody. We'll play the melody down once, and then everybody will solo. Okay. And that'll use up the rest. And then we'll go back to the melody, and but don't worry, he says, because Hot Dog It is your hit record. Oh. So, where it took us 3 days to do Hot Dog It took us about 3-4 hours to do this piece. Yeah. And we got through with it, and I said, what's the name of this one, Maurice? He says, call it Sun Goddess. You know, and I said, okay. Well, we put out Hot Dog It, and we're waiting for things to happen.
Waiting for the jackpot.
I think my mother bought a copy, and maybe the neighbor bought a copy, and it quickly. But the album was selling like hotcakes. People, the record company says, the single is not making it, but the album is running out of the stores. People are coming in asking for the album that has Sun Goddess on it. They heard it on jazz stations, etc. Yeah. And that's
so that tune was working and sold the album.
That's what sold the album.
Obviously, in your long and successful and storied and impressive and noble career, music's been good to you.
Very good.
Share with us your thoughts, I guess, on why there's some value in pursuing music, I guess.
Well, you know, the Greeks had it right that while we try to perfect our physical being and stay in shape,
Right.
and while we try to raise our intelligence level to the highest ever, there's something other than physical and intelligence. There is the spirit. And the way you access the spirit is through the arts. And not only does it make you a well-rounded person, or me, or anybody else, but it contributes to our society. Music and the arts. And the higher it's on a level, the higher it's recognized as that in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our societies, reading, writing, physical fitness, and the arts, the closer we get to love, to loving each other. And we learn to reason and deal with those things that become minute and unnecessary. People in the arts are tolerant, forgiving, because we know nobody's perfect.
Very well spoken. And needless to say, you're preaching to the choir on this end, most of our viewers. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. You've been so patient, and it's so nice for you to come out and join us. And I'm sure our viewers are going to be thrilled to hear these stories.
I've enjoyed every moment.
Thanks a ton.
Music Makers is made possible in part by NAM, the National Association of Music Merchants. We envision a world in which the joy and many benefits of making music are a precious element of daily living for everyone. Want to play?
For more information on Music Makers with Scott Houston and program guests, please visit our website at www.musicmakerstvshow.com.